Hello and welcome back to a Trash Bug Toy Reviews. So today we have a very special item. It is our first of the SH Monsterarts figures. It is the Mechagodzilla from 2021. And this figure, I was actually totally uninterested in at first. I was totally going to pass it up. The design, if you've heard our podcast, it came from a monster movie, you know that I felt like the design was kind of boxy. I really didn't like it at first. But I will admit that it has grown on me in very unusual ways. So let's get into the history of this guy first. So starting it right off, this guy obviously appeared in the 2021 film Godzilla vs. Kong. He was kind of an open secret of the film as he's been described. Pretty much everyone knew after a couple of toy leaks came out that he was going to be in it. Even before that, everyone was really talking about him being in the movie. Everyone suspected it. But then, lo and behold, he turns out to be in it. In the movie, he's kind of like the reincarnated King Ghidorah. They use his skull to control him through like psionic links. It's pretty interesting. I like the approach of being able to control a giant mecha. It is outrageous, don't get me wrong, but for the case of the movie, especially for everything the Monsterverse established, I didn't bat an eye at all at it. The design of this guy is inspired by bits and pieces of the older Mechagodzillas that have come out over the years. You can kind of see it all over the place. There's little pieces that definitely came from the original Mechagodzilla, and then bits and pieces that came from the Heisei, although I'll admit that the Heisei one probably had the least influence on this guy. And then, of course, Kiryu had a huge influence, as anyone who's seen the 2000 films know, that version of Mechagodzilla goes rogue, exactly like this one. But that's a little bit of the history. And now, let's get right on into the review part of this all. As always, just a reminder of anyone coming back to the channel or anyone new to the channel, the way that I do my reviews are looking at three core aspects of the figures. I'm looking at the sculpt and details on the figures, the color and paint applications, and then finally the articulation. I'm rating all of those categories out of 5, adding those up, and then dividing by the 3 categories to get my average for the final grade on the figure. In addition to this, we are going to look at a couple accessories with this guy, and those may play a factor, they may not. We will see as we go. And now, let's start right off with the sculpt. So, starting to take a closer look at this guy. If we start with the head, we can see that this guy is sculpted out beautifully. If we start anywhere, he's sculpted out beautifully. But just starting with the head here. You can see he has this, again going back to the podcast, we talked about this during the episode for this one, but he's got this very almost soft, friendly, unassuming look to him. I don't know if it was meant to be menacing, but it's really not. And at first I didn't like it that much, but I admit it has grown on me. I really like how he's got the razor blades in his mouth. He's got all these little teeth. You can see he's even got the little, what are they called? Pistons that are used to open and close his mouth in there, which are so cool. But the kind of friendly, unassuming look to his face makes me kind of like him more, because it's very you wouldn't assume this to be a killing machine right away. You would if you looked at the rest of the figure, but just the face. It's almost friendly. Looking at the shoulders here, we can see we've got these nice little shoulder pads with some missile launchers in there. Not going to open those up just yet. In fact, I might not at all because they are very, very stuck on my figure. Going to his back, we can see these beautifully sculpted dorsal plates on here. Everything just looks exactly as it did in the movie. Not as vibrantly colored, but again, that's for later. Going down his back, we just see this continues down the tail, and look at the way that they did the joints on this tail too. It's just so well done. It looks exactly like how it did in the movie, and it lends itself to just looking absolutely stunning. The tip of the tail has a signature claw. Again, it's a little early getting into it, but unfortunately this doesn't open up. That is a huge bummer for me as somebody who wants maximum posability and, action features, but it does look really, really cool. And I'm still having fun with it. Just saying, I've had this guy for a little over a month now, and he has been an absolute ball to play around with. Looking over here at the chest, we can see that every little detail going around his chest is sculpted in there, and he again has his little missile launchers over here. I almost said pads for some reason, whatever. But these ones I can open up, still a little stuck in there, but just to kind of show you a little bit, you can see that these are sculpted out nicely too. They're nice and simple, but again, for how much they add into this guy, it's just really well done. His leg pistons are all beautifully sculpted out. And just looking at the arms and the legs, every little detail is in there. It's so cool. Honestly, when it comes down to his price point, I wouldn't be surprised if most of it really was just the sculpting. Because you can see too, a lot of it is just a solid piece, but most of it is separate, individually sculpted pieces that they had to put together in the factory. As far as production is concerned, it's really cool. The chest is pretty much one big giant piece. It looks like there's a few pieces stuck on there, but you can kind of see looking at the back that it's all stuck on there. Again, we'll get into it later, but the waist doesn't have any articulation at all. There's nothing really on the chest other than the missile pads. And I suspect that a lot of it was just kind of cost saving because there are a lot of parts to this guy. You can see his toes are beautifully done too. Even underneath, they look just absolutely magnificent. And they're all cast and die cast. And then just finally coming back here to his hands. He's got those little slicey saw bits on there. And you can just see them on both of the fingers on here. Both of the sections of the hand, excuse me. And even for his punchy hands, he's got those. So, obviously, don't think I need to say a whole lot about this. This guy is absolutely taking home a 5 in this category. Let's move on to the color and paint apps. So as far as color and paint apps go, this guy is rather limited. He's obviously cast entirely in this light and slightly darker gray in some spots. It's not a whole lot. Even his eyes are barely colored. Like, even looking closely, they're red, but you can like barely tell. They're very tiny. This looks a lot more like his off position. Like, there's no vibrancy to any of the color. You can see here too, like the only real paint applications they did were these little red tips on his dorsal plates. And that is literally it. The paint that's done is nice. Mechagodzilla wasn't a super colorful figure in the movie, but you know, it would have been nice to see a little bit more, or at least the vibrant red. I bet you anything we're going to get in online exclusive version of this guy that has like the deep red, and even the proton scream. Talking about accessories a little early, but this guy doesn't come with his beam, which was a huge bummer. Makes sense because of how SH Monsterarts does stuff, but I'm gonna call it now. Anything, they're gonna release another version of this guy. As far as color and paint apps go, I'm giving him a 3. He does what he needs to do. He looks like Mechagodzilla. There's no mistaking it. None of the paint is sloppy that is done. It's just so limited. Like, I'm so tempted to give him less than that, but again, it's the paint that is there is done well. It looks like Mechagodzilla. It's not like he's got a ton of color, but it's just disappointing that they didn't do a little bit more with the red. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, I'm sure, the articulation. So we're going to go through the bigger spots of it, not necessarily every single thing, but I will briefly touch on every part that moves. His tail is extremely flexible. I am going to just say flat out, his tail is the coolest part of this figure. It is so smooth. You can just see, you can get into almost any position you want with only needing to make the slightest adjustments. This is so well done. It's breathtaking, honestly. Just could not ask for better articulation in a single part. His head moves, his neck moves a bit. You can see he doesn't have a ton of articulation as far as in the head. He's very limited with where he can move, and more of that is the sculpt more than anything. That's a bit of a bummer, but it does make sure that he looks the best that he can. His mouth obviously opens and closes. We've got these missile launchers, and like I said, I am struggling to open these, so yeah, my nails are all like fucked up right now, so I don't think I'm gonna have an easy time getting these open, unfortunately. The arms, though, have a nice swivel and a hinge at the elbows. And one of the big things that does frustrate me about this guy is that his articulation is very stiff in some points and very loose in others. Like you'll see this shoulder joint just moves so smooth, but then the shoulder swivel here is so stiff. I'm legitimately scared of breaking him anytime I'm moving it. The elbow's the same. Like, I'm gonna get a tiny bend just to show you, but it's just so stiff. It makes me really scared of breaking him. His hands don't move, but we'll get into it later. One of the big accessories he comes with is separate fingers and separate hands, so you can get him in different positions. I have very mixed feelings about this. I much would have rather he had just movable fingers, but I do like the fact that they decided to do a method that keeps them nice and stiff, because Mechagodzilla's hands are probably one of his biggest features, especially on this figure. You know, he's got those grabby hands. You want them to look good, so if those were warping or breaking or loosening over time, I can see where the issue would come with that. You get a tiny bit of articulation on the hands because it is on a ball joint, but the design of the hands makes it extremely limited, so you can kind of just rock it back and forth. It's cool there's some, but it really isn't amazing by any stretch of the imagination. Moving down here, again we have these missile launchers on his chest. There is no articulation on his chest or his waist, which I'm okay with. This isn't a guy that you're necessarily going to want to be doing that with, but it is kind of a bummer. When I saw promo pictures of this guy, and even just the original photos, I've talked at length about how much I don't like this design that much, but I was like, oh cool, based on how the figure looks, I can probably get him in like a quadrupedal stance, and that might actually look pretty cool. Like, the whole design of the figure looks like it would lend itself to that. But once you get it in hand and see the articulation, I am going to say flat out that there's no fucking way you can do that, unfortunately. The biggest point of contention on this figure though is absolutely his hips here. You can see the pistons move as you move him, which in one sense is really cool. In the other sense though, it means that you can only move them up or down so much before they start crashing into other stuff, or you risk tearing them right off. And this is one of the things where, like the Heisei Ghidorah's wings that came out forever ago, you need to be so on your game making sure you don't break this. It is quite disappointing. It looks very good, but it just takes such a delicate hand to actually play with him. It is a huge bummer for somebody like me who likes to move these guys around. I like to see like what they can do for articulation. It just really sucks that I have such a hard time actually moving it around. The knees do have a bit of a hinge here. No swivel to the sides, which I'm okay with again, but it really, because of you already having this limited articulation with the hips because of the pistons, it's kind of a bummer, because again, you get such limited motion with this. Even the feet don't really have a swivel. It's all hinge, and then a hinge on the foot. When it comes to this guy's articulation, I hate to say it, but I'm gonna have to give him a 2. You know, the articulation that's good is really good. Like, the tail should define how SH Monsterarts should do their figures moving forward, especially these mechanical ones where you can hide it so well. It's just so fluid. Like, this is so fun to play with just by itself. But everything else about the figure is like, I'm either scared I'm gonna break it, or it just doesn't do what I want it to do at all. So it's definitely going to be a 2. It's not the worst articulation I've ever seen by any stretch, but it's just the points that are bad are so bad. Now, before we get into the size comparisons, which is going to be another part of this whole review that I'm sure I'll have some opinions on, but let's just take a look at the accessories this guy comes with. I've switched them out a little bit from the originals that this guy came with, but you can see he comes with an alternate set of hands that has the fingers bent slightly inward for more of a grasping position, or like the little pinchy pinch that I have this one in. But you can also take the fingers off of them and switch them out, so you get all kinds of really cool combinations. And you of course get the other hand too, where it is more of a flat hand. I'll show you that in just a second. This one is more of like the open palm hand, which again, you get to interchange them a little bit and make some cool arrangements with the fingers. It's really cool that they added this, just going back to the sculpt part of this. Like, it keeps the fingers nice and stiff, it keeps them strong, you don't have to worry about any of the pieces really breaking, but you can still lose these halves, you can still lose the main hand halves if you're not careful and like really keeping an eye on them. The biggest issue that I have with these is just that it's like such a strange part of the figure to have such like a high level of articulation and switching out with. You can do a lot with it, but it's just, come on, SH Monsterarts, I would have rather the beam. I know anybody would have rather had the beam than the hand switching. It's cool, but it's just like, ugh. You know, ragging on it a little bit. I'm not gonna take away points, I'm not gonna add any points, they're fine, it's cool, but it's just like, come on, man. So, talking about the size, anyone who's gotten this figure or seen promo photos, I'm sure is aware at this point, he towers over most of the other figures, especially the Godzilla and Kong that came from this line. He is a big boy. He is something between 7.5 and 8 inches, standing straight up, and again, just depending on how you hunch the legs and the body and everything, he's going to vary somewhere in there. But he's a big boy, especially compared to the average of around 6.5 inches or so of the other articulated figures. Now, the official height of Mechagodzilla in the movie is 400 feet, and the official height of the MonsterVerse Godzilla is 393 feet. So obviously this figure, I don't have the MonsterVerse Godzilla to compare him against right now, but he is way too fucking big. I will just say, I want to take off points because of this size issue, but hate me if you want to for this. I'm not going to, because when you compare him to other figures, I will say that his bigger size, though not movie accurate, makes him a much, much more impressive figure. It really makes me like him way more, because he actually looks really scary, because he's so big compared to the other monsters. Even next to Ghidorah, he like looks like he fits in. There's that part of me that wants to be a really good reviewer and take it off because it's not exactly accurate, but there's the other part of me that likes the idea of this Mechagodzilla being so monstrous. So, I'm not going to take anything off, but let's just take a look at some of the other figures we can compare him against. So, I am going to try to get him in next to King Ghidorah, although this is a nightmare of setting these figures up. So, take a look. Looks really cool. We're going to put him next to the 9 Days Godzilla, the Rebirth version. I think this is the original one for the original Godzilla SH Monsterarts. He looks so cool next to him. He's too big, but it makes him look even cooler, which is like... just to get some other figures in here too. Here's one of my Bandai vinyls. Here is another one. Then here is the Evangelion Unit 1, which I quite like the sizing with these guys. And then here is just one of our HG IBO kits again. Just another robot to compare him against. One last thing, just as far as the additional pieces that we're looking at, is unfortunately going to be the construction. I am taking off the point for that. It is going to bring our total to 9. And that is going to bring us down to a score of 3 once you divide that all down by the 3 core categories. I think that's a good grade to put him in, but the biggest issue that I have with this is just that the construction of the hip joints leaves so much vulnerability to this figure. Already the stiff joints have me worried, but like the hips are, if you just move it the wrong way once, you're gonna snap something. So for a final grade on this guy, as said, it is going to be a 3. Which is perfectly fine for me. He is, you know, very middle of the line. He looks very good. He does a lot of things really well. He's got the best tail articulation ever, but he definitely has a lot of features holding him back. And it kind of bums me out because I guarantee you we're going to get a re-release of this guy, but I also guarantee you we're not going to get any of those really important fixes. We're almost certainly just going to get a repaint with the Scream. So, the first 3 for the channel. Really cool figure, but just very middle of the line. So just to close things out, thank you guys so much for checking this out again. I hope you like this figure. I hope you like the review. I know I sound really harsh, but I do want to be very clear. I love this figure. It's just, from a reviewer's perspective, it's just looking for so much more. It's pretty underwhelming. I love it. I'm happy I have it, even if it was a little expensive. He looks awesome next to all my other figures, but I know that SH Monsterarts could have done better with this. We've seen the magic that they can do with some figures. But either way, thanks for checking me out. Take a subscription if you'd like to check out more of my toy reviews as they come out. Right now I'm releasing once per week. It's like every Thursday right now. Although, you know, with the holidays coming up, I wouldn't be surprised if that throws me off a little bit. Fingers crossed it doesn't. But if you want to check out my Instagram, it's a Trashbug Toys on there as well. I post toy content to tie in with all of my releases. I'm always on my story, just giving news and all of that good stuff. If you want to check out the podcast, check out It Came From a Monster Movie. I'll have it in my link tree down below, and then of course you can check out the Instagram, the podcast itself, wherever you listen to podcasts. Me and Henry have a lot of fun. We did cover this movie. I believe that the episode is not available anymore, but we have talked about this one. We liked the movie. It's a lot of fun, but you know, it had its issues, just like the toy itself. Season 5 is starting up in the new year, so we are very excited for that. We're starting up with a couple smaller monster movies, Bats from the 90s, and then a surprise, really cool release, The Cleanse from 2016. Next time, though, on the channel, we're going to take a look at the Mega Bloks Plasma Dinosaur Terror Sweep. I am probably the only person left that remembers these and actually liked them, but oh my god, I am obsessed with these figures. So once again, thank you guys so much. Give me a like, give me a subscription, whatever you like. Check out my Instagram, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night and enjoy your holidays.